Hey there, Squirrel Army. How's it going? Today, we're doing another one of the sub-commanders from the recent Mother of Machines commander deck. This is for Rashmi and Ragavan. Alright, so whenever you cast your spell, your first spell during each of your turns, so that's odd, I guess. So I guess we want to also take extra turns. So yeah, it's worded a little weird, but I'm guessing that's what it means there. If we take extra turns, etc. We exile the top card of an opponent's library, so that's okay. We create a treasure, which yeah, that's nice. Then we may cast the exile card without paying its mana cost if it's a spell with mana value less than the number of artifacts we control. So we want a lot of artifacts so that we can steal our opponent's stuff. And then if we didn't cast it this way, we may cast it this turn. So we can just cast it generically if we happen to get enough mana to cast it later. But if we can actually cast it that way, we actually get to cast it for free. So that's obviously better than casting it or trying to hard cast it. But there are circumstances in which you'll obviously just not be able to cast people's spells if you just don't have enough mana and whatnot, that sort of thing. So this is going to be a little bit weird of a teamer deck in some ways here, because we're going to want to run as many good artifacts as what we kind of can. And a lot of the better artifacts that we can run are mana rocks and whatnot, that sort of thing. So there are a few token generators like whatnot and treasure generators, etc. Specifically, Ragavan is one of them. But again, we also want to steal our opponent's stuff. So Ragavan does do some of that. So this could be a very interesting kind of deck. So yeah, I'm going to get along with building this one as voted by you guys next. So yeah, let's get along with this one. You can join the Squirrel Army by subscribing. Alrighty, so now we can have a bit of a look at the finished list here. Over $400, so not the cheapest list. So it is what it is. I did scrimp a bit on the lands, though I did put in some more better lands than sometimes I do. I sometimes just put in the basics and whatnot. But anyway, that is what it is. But anyway, guys, as I always do try to say, before I get too deep into explaining these lists and whatnot, because I know a lot of people don't really want to hear all the blather on and whatnot. They just want to sort of see what the overall game plan is, and you can see the list here on the screen. Can't obviously read everything, but again, if you check out the comments down there below, deck list is right there, so you can check that out and read everything for yourself, proxy it, do whatever you want to do with it. So yeah, if you're not too interested, just check that out. But for those people who, want to be here and just hear about what's going on, if you're not as experienced or you want to know a bit more about the strategy and the synergies and that sort of thing, I'll go through it as best as I can. So, only a couple of planeswalkers. So, I'll just say quickly, again with the lands, there's not much there for me to talk about. So, it's just a bunch of basics for the most part. You could easily make a better mana base than what's there, but again, that's pretty decent just for a fairly budget mana base. Not perfect in any stretch of the imagination, but it's still alright, I think. So that's fine. We can live with that. Oko, I don't know whether we're gonna elk people's stuff that much, but that's the only real way we can steal their stuff that much with Hoko. So I don't know. But then those things that we steal don't have abilities and whatnot, and we really want our opponent's things to have abilities. And just stealing random 3/3s isn't that amazing unless we're just like giving away random food that doesn't really do anything. Um, for the most part, at least just gains you 3 life, so that's not that impressive, but it can do. It can steal other things of our opponents. So that's all right. There's not a huge amount of stuff that you can honestly steal with it that's that impressive. Again, but there is some stuff that sort of you forget has only 3 power and whatnot. Things that have double strike and things like that. So it can actually steal a few things here and there that you'd be surprised that it can steal. But still, I think it's all right to steal some stuff, and it just helps us out by making food, which can gain us life, and it can also elk our opponent's stuff sometimes. I prefer to elk our own things so that we've got defenders and things like that. But yeah, it is tough to get rid of sometimes, and it is always so annoying. I always make it a rule to not elk people's commanders because basically that locks them unless they're a deck that can sacrifice their commander on will. It's sort of very annoying. But anyway, Dak Faden, like, yeah, we're mostly here for him to steal some people's artifacts. And yeah, we're not always going to see people playing artifacts, but there might be a few people playing artifacts here and there. So it can steal the artifacts that we want to steal, and sometimes it won't do that, but like we again can give them artifacts and things like that, so it's well worth stealing those artifacts that we're giving them sometimes. And just looting isn't too terribly bad, especially for 3 mana, it isn't too terribly bad. So yeah, and when we get the emblem, that's pretty good. That does help us steal a whole bunch of stuff, so that is well worth getting to if we can ever get there. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about the instants, and we don't even have any sorceries because all the instants that are in here are just good removal stuff. For the most part, the main reason why we don't have a lot of removal in this deck, like board wipes and things like that, is, and same in the instance here in terms of amount of removal, is just due to the fact that, well, we want to steal our opponent's stuff. We don't want to kill our opponent's stuff that much unless we super duper have to. So we'd rather just steal their stuff rather than killing their stuff. Unless we 1000% need to, we'd rather just steal it for ourselves. So that's just there for emergency like situations for the most part. Enchantments are the lowest number of cards. Some of these cards aren't on the strategy per se, which is, I guess they're just here for good. They're good enchantment or artifact or whatever. They do good work for the most part, like Guardian Project. That's not really synergistic, but we're playing a bunch of creatures and we're going to play our opponent's creatures. So that seems alright to draw us more cards, so that's just fine. Might makes it right. At the beginning of combat, we get control of a creature. If we control the creature with the greatest power. And we untap it, gains haste until end of turn. So that's pretty alright. It is 6 mana though, but it is a consistent effect, and a lot of the other creatures that just enter the battlefield and steal a thing are like 5 mana anyway, so I think this is still well worth the time to do. Mind Stalation, again, it's a lot of mana to invest, but I think we're playing at a more casual table with this deck. It's not like a super powerful deck. It can do some funny things and whatnot. It does depend, obviously, what is in our opponent's deck and what we actually steal from our opponents. But again, we can do very powerful things sometimes, and it can be very annoying to play against decks like this. And I don't really like playing against decks like this because it's just like every time they steal all the good stuff, and I can never stop them because they already stole all my removal and whatnot. So I'm just sitting there going, yep, cool story, bro. Cool story. It'd be great if I could do a single frickin' thing over here. But it is what it is sometimes. But whenever an opponent casts their first spell each turn, they exile the top card of their library. If it's an on-land card, we may cast it without paying its cost. So, again, it is very high mana, and, like, a lot of times it's one of those things that people will try to get rid of as fast as possible, to not have a much of their stuff stolen. But it's still alright. I find that even if you get one spell off of it, it's still alright. If you get more than one spell off of it, it starts becoming better and better. But you do really want a high impact spell off of it. Obviously, you don't want to hit removal that much off of it, but that'll inevitably happen sometimes, so it is what it is. Ranger class isn't that amazing, honestly, but it's just okay. Makes a 2-2 on the first mode. Then when we attack, we can put a counter on a creature. The final mode is the best mode, I always find. We can look at the top card of our library at any time. We may cast creature spells from the top of our library. So again, we're playing a lot of creatures for the most part as well. So that helps us out with that card advantage. The wolf's okay. The +1/+1 counters are okay, but we really care about the last mode with this deck. Ristic Study, our opponents are just going to get taxed for playing their spells, and that's something that'll help us out by just slowing them down a little bit and helping us, gain control of the game and whatnot. So, worth our time to think about. Rhythm, we are casting a few creatures of our own as well, but we will cast a lot of our opponent's creatures. So if we're playing any deck that wants to counter our own stuff or the opponent's stuff just to try to stop us from winning, this does help us out in some regards. It's not a lot, but it is helpful in some regards sometimes. And just giving our stuff either a counter or haste is very useful, or even our opponent's stuff. Again, it does work when we're playing our opponent's stuff, so that is good. Stolen Strategy, beginning of our upkeep, we exile the top card of each opponent's library, and then until end of turn, we may cast the spells from among the exile cards and spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So again, just getting those cards that we need from ourselves and from our opponents. And we do need a lot of mana for this one to really pay off a lot, but if you just choose the best thing rather than just choosing a bunch of piddly little things that don't really do a whole lot, it's usually a lot better. Though sometimes, again, you can get unlucky with it, so it does depend on what you hit. I'm not really going to talk about some of the mana rocks and stuff that's in here. Usually when you're in green, you don't need these for the most part. But in this deck, because it cares about artifacts and whatnot, I did feel like we wanted some, at least a couple. So they're just here to be artifacts for our commander's ability plus ramp, I guess, for the most part. Cast 1, we exile target opponent's library, the top card, one per time, until they exile an instant or sorcery, and we may cast that card without paying its mana cost, and we put the rest of the cards on the bottom of their library in a random order. So that's alright. Again, we'll mostly hit people's ramp or removal with this, so it's not that amazing for the most part, but it does steal our opponent's stuff, so that does help us out sometimes. And it can give us very useful things. And that's another reason why we don't need a lot of removal, is because we are trying to steal our opponent's spells and that sort of thing. So these sorts of things can really help us find that removal that we need. Conjurer's Closet, there's a few things that are in here that are just like ETB triggered creatures. So I felt like we need something like this to get them to do a little bit more than just be a one-off type effect so that we can get continued value out of them. Helm of the Host is in here for much the same reason, but it can also really help us out with our commander so that if we got multiple copies of our commander, we've got multiple triggers going off of our commander's ability or any other thing that we want to copy that will help steal our opponent's stuff, or even some of our opponent's stuff that's sometimes useful. And whatnot. There are a few combos that you can kind of do with it if you've got extra combats and things like that. So it can be really potent in those regards. But yeah. The Inspiring Sanctuary, we're going to make a fair few artifacts in this deck. And we've also got a few artifacts in this deck. So turning the artifacts that we're generating in this deck or just happen to have in this deck into essentially mana rocks isn't too bad, especially when we can't do a whole lot with a whole bunch of food sometimes or a whole bunch of clues sometimes, and we just need more mana to sort of sink into other things and whatnot, so it can really help us out. The Bestiary, it is here because it is helping with our commander's ability, but it's a decent artifact as well that most green decks want. Scrying one, always forget about the Scrying one at the beginning of the upkeep, but whatever. It is what it is. Whenever we cast a creature, we can play green and draw a card. So again, that counts for our stuff that we'll play and our opponent's stuff that we'll steal for the most part. So that's really useful. Oh, look out. Mimic Vat, if our opponent's stuff dies, we can put it under the Mimic Vat and then pay 3 mana and make a copy of it, gains haste, exile at the beginning of the end step. So again, stealing our opponent's stuff when they die, we just choose the best thing that dies and just keep getting copies of the best thing that we can get. Stronic Resonator can copy our commander's abilities or copy any other triggered ability we control, so that can be very useful in certain circumstances. Swiftfoot Boots is here to protect our commander, plus it's a pretty decent artifact that helps us count for artifacts. So. The Shackles, it's not the most amazing one, but it's okay. It does steal an opponent's thing as long as you keep it tapped, but if you don't want, like, if something better comes along, we'll just let it go. Like, we want the best thing our opponents have, for the most part, with this, or the thing that benefits us the most, rather than just something random. So, again, it's prime time for a removal, but again, it's well worth it for the most part to get these sorts of constant effects. That's what happens with constant effects. They're primed for removal for a long time, but they are very good because they do it so much. Wand of Wonder is a lot like the other wand, but it's each opponent, and we roll a d20 and whatnot. But still, we get to exile their cards from the top of their library one per time until we get an instant or sorcery, and then put the rest into the bottom of their library in a random order, and we get to cast that spell without paying its cost. Yeah, we can cast either 1, 2, or 3 instant sorceries. So that's alright. You know, like, even if we get one, that's still okay. We get to choose the best one that our opponents have. Academy Manufacturer, our commander does make treasures, so we might as well be making foods and clues as well. Foods and clues are pretty darn useful for the most part to us, because again, they count for artifacts for our commander's ability and whatnot, and that sort of thing. So, and again, we can also get mana out of those clues, and we can get card draw out of the clues. So, and we can get life out of the food if we're really desperate. Adrix and Nev, this is one of my favourite cards in these colours, honestly. I just wish sometimes I could play it in certain decks because it's just so amazingly good. But unfortunately, I haven't got decks in this colour, I don't think, so I'm a bit sad about that sometimes. But whatever, it's still really good. When you make a token, you get twice that many tokens instead. It's just amazing, really good. Augur of Autumn, we can look at the top card of our library. We can play lands from the top of our library. And then if we have 3 or more different powers, we can cast creature spells from the top of our library, which is super easy to do, honestly. I've never really had many times where it hasn't been active and hasn't been working. I've barely ever seen anyone have problems activating the Coven ability. So I don't think it's a real hurdle to jump over anymore. Beast Whisperer, we just cast a creature, we draw a card, so really good. Again, we're playing a lot of creatures and we're stealing our opponent's creatures, and the way we're stealing our opponent's creatures is by sometimes just stealing them outright, like this with the wheels here, but again, we are casting a lot of their stuff again, so it is well worth it. The wheels here, anyway, as I sort of said, just tap it to gain control of a creature with power less than or equal to the number of creatures we control. So we've got to have a few creatures to gain control of bigger creatures, but still, that's okay. You know, eventually we'll get those creatures. Birds of Paradise, just a mana dork. We need multicolored mana dorks in a deck like this. The Califed, this is a bit of a odd card. Very old card, obviously. But you can choose not to untap it. When it comes into play, you can choose a creature type, and you can tap it to gain control of a target creature that isn't the chosen type as long as it's tapped. So, I don't know what the most or the least useless type would be. Maybe Badger or something like that. It doesn't really matter as long as, like, you're not choosing human or something, or dragon or whatever, some of the most played things. It's probably fine to say jellyfish or something, or whatever you want to say. So, yeah, it doesn't really matter that much as long as you're not naming some of the more played ones, or if you know what your opponents are kind of playing, then it's kind of like, well, just don't name monkeys because this person, or apes because this person's obviously playing monkeys and apes, or whatever it is, you know, just read the room a little bit. But again, it's still really good to gain control of things. The Captivating Crew, you pay 3 mana and you gain control of a creature an opponent controls until end of turn. You untap it, gains haste until end of turn. You can only do that as a sorcery. I don't love the mana gate on it, but again, we need these consistent abilities more than we need one-off abilities, and this was the best one that I could really find. So, it's alright. It's not amazing. It's still alright, though. The Recruiter, when it or another pirate enters, we get to active treason one of our opponent's things. Not that we don't have any pirates, but we don't have a huge amount of pirates, but not none. So it still can do a lot, but this is one of the creatures that I thought we need some more flickering for, so put that in. The Fatality here, it's a lot of hybrid mana here, but whatever. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may gain control of target permanent until end of turn, and if you do, you untap it, gains haste until end of turn. Plus, it's a 4/4 flyer, which isn't too bad. But again, yeah, it is a little bit slow at doing what it's going to do, but again, we need these consistent abilities, not just one-offs. Galena, this is an old card. This is a really old card, but it's a great card. You can gain control of target legend or legendary permanent just for 2 mana and tapping it. Now, it is 5 mana to get it out there, but still, it's a really good card for a deck like this that needs to steal stuff. The new Atali, much like the old Atali, does a whole lot of stuff, but, you know, when it enters, we exile cards from the top of target opponent's each opponent's library. Each player's library. Until they exile a non-land card, you may cast any number of spells from among them without paying their cost, which is just amazing. So that's pretty good. It is 7 mana, but still, that's fine. And the other side doesn't really do a whole lot for us, but again, that's alright. It's still a really big body and whatnot. So this is another one where you want to flicker it and whatnot. So, yeah. The old Atali, obviously, just attacks. You exile the top card of each player's library. Then you may cast any number of spells without paying their cost. So just really great for a deck like this. The Flutist. So he comes in and he active treasons somebody's thing, but he also gives it Myriad. So that's pretty good, a pretty useful ability when we steal somebody's thing that just smashes each of our opponents for heaps of damage or whatnot, or just gives us so much more other effects that we really want or really need. Even if it's just a legend that enters the battlefield and kills it, legend rules itself, still we'll get the effects of those things, so it can be really useful and whatnot to do that. We've got Paco and Haldan in here. I don't know where Paco is, but they're a good combo together. That like one doesn't really work without the other, but they do tutor each other up. So once you get one, you get the other, which is pretty nice. Haldan actually allows you to cast the spells that that Paco actually fetches essentially for you. So you really need Haldan to survive more than Paco. I know that like if you're not getting more cards, it's kind of a little bit but if you lose Paco, at least if you've got a few spells in the pile, at least you've got a few options that you can sort of play from when you've got Haldan, rather than when you've just got the dog, you can't really cast those spells. And this deck is really about stealing those spells and whatnot. So you care more, I would say you care more about stealing the spells than just getting rid of them off of opponents' decks. But I could be wrong. But yeah. Jolene. Whenever a player attacks one or more of our opponents, they get a treasure. So it incentivizes our opponents to attack each other, which, that's good. But it helps us out too, so that's useful. Plus the treasure is really good for our commander in many ways. And if we create one or more treasure tokens, instead we create those treasure tokens plus an additional treasure tokens, and we can sack 5 treasures to put 5 counters on it. But we're probably not going to do that for the most part. That doesn't really matter to us. We just like getting the treasures and additional treasures. So, well worth it. Uktabi Prince, he's here. We're giving people bananas. I don't know why we're giving people bananas, but it does help us out with the artifacts thing, and it does produce mana that we do need. And if our opponents sacrifice their artifacts, which, again, they'll be sacrificing these treasures that we'll be giving them mostly, we can grow our monkey. So I don't think we've got any other monkeys, so... But yeah, this one's still pretty good. And when he attacks, a defending player has to sack an artifact, so that's alright. Lonus, again, both of the modes are actually really good in this one. I often don't think that Lonus's other ability is that amazing for the most part, but the clues thing is pretty darn good usually. But with this one, it is pretty darn useful to sacrifice those clues and steal somebody's thing, so yeah, that's definitely well worth putting into a deck like this. Malcolm, he's just here to make treasures. So yeah, that's pretty good, I guess, for us. Mizio, it's much like Itali. It is a lot smaller in terms of power and toughness, but like again, we hope for the best sometimes, and you hope to buff these things. But again, it just has such a big effect sometimes to steal so many of our opponent's stuff that it's well worth it, even so. But yeah, it is pretty good. Stealing our opponent's cards and that being able to do similar things. Molten Primordial, I like this one because it steals a card from each opponent. So that's usually pretty powerful. And whatnot. So it is a once-off again, so this is another creature you want to flicker a few times, though it is, again, 7 mana, so I don't know how much time you've got left in the game at that point, but again, you might be playing at those lower tables, so yeah, it's alright. The Iron Frost Frame, we hit people, we draw cards, and our stuff that's attacking has Death Touch. That's all pretty good. Thopter is here for mana. There's Parko. He goes with Haldan. Professional Facebreaker. When we hit people, we make treasures. Again, we need mana, so we want to get it in any way we can. Plus, we want artifacts, so that's pretty useful. And we can sack treasures to exile the top card and play it this turn. So it sometimes is a bit whiffy with hitting cards and whatnot by hitting like a 9-drop just after you've sacrificed your 9th treasure or whatever, things like that. But at least you've got control of the ability and you can sort of figure out, do I want to do it now? You know, I know it's not always the case, but again, it's just one of those things. At least if you know, okay, I've got 10 mana, so most of my stuff is less than 10 mana. The likelihood of me getting my 10 mana spell or whatever is super low. And then, of course, you always hit it, but still, it's always the way, but still. But yeah, still really useful. Ragavan hits people, we make a treasure, we exile the top card of their library, until of turn we can cast it. He is very small, so there's that, but he's really fast onto the battlefield and whatnot, so he can be really powerful in a lot of circumstances. So, yeah. And if we can find ways to get him in, he's really good. Royal Elemental, we landfall and we can steal a thing. So that's really useful for us. The Manipulator, when we remove 2 counters from it, we gain control of a creature with power less than or equal to the number of counters removed this way. So it has to be pretty big, but it does have Evolve, and it is a 0/1, so it can get pretty big pretty quickly. But again, it is a consistent ability though, so again, but it can get a long time before you actually get anything super amazing sometimes, but still it is probably well worth our time. Thasser, again, we need more flickering in this deck to help out the things that need to enter and do a thing for the most part, so I felt like this is well worth our time to look at. Tireless Provisioner, again, it helps us make mana and it helps us make artifacts, so Commander cares about both of those things. The Tracker, clues can help us draw cards and artifacts do help us out, so that's alright. Toski, here for card draw. We have to attack with him, which is a little bit annoying sometimes, and he has indestructible and can't be countered, so he's pretty useful, but yeah. I actually don't want to talk about this side. I want to talk about this side. Nasawi. At the beginning of your upkeep, you exile the top card of each opponent's library, and until end of turn, you may cast spells from among those exile cards and spend mana or mana of any color. When you cast a spell from exile, you put a counter on it. So that's cool. I don't think the other side does a whole lot. You know, at least I don't think so. You can certainly do some stuff with it, but there's only a couple of instant sorceries that we have in our own deck, so I don't think it'll do much here. Though again, you could try to steal opponents' spells, but it actually has to be from your hand, so it's a bit weird with that. Vizier's just here for more card advantage. We can look at the top card of the library and cast creature cards. Willbender, whenever we target an opponent's thing, we can gain control of it. I don't think we've actually got that many things that target our opponent's stuff, so I don't know, but still, it's pretty darn useful sometimes. The Dragon Claw, on our combat, we can pay 3 mana, and if we do, we gain control of a creature an opponent controls with power less than this thing's power. Until end of turn, untap it, gains haste. So this is one of the best ones here. It does have that mana gate, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but still, it's probably one of the better ones because, again, a consistent ability. Actually, maybe this one's one of the better ones. The Renegade Leader, when she attacks, look at the defending player's hand and we may put a creature card from it onto the battlefield under our control, tapped and attacking that player or planeswalker they control, return it to their hand at the beginning of the end step. So again, we only get it for a short period of time, but that's okay. We still get to do stuff with it. We still get sent to the battlefield effects, or it's deals combat damage trigger or whatever, things like that. So we want to look at creatures that are like that, or that just have lots of power and toughness for what we're going to get, because we're going to get a free thing anyway. And we can try and copy it, or try and flicker it, or do other things with it to keep control of it. And it is a flyer, so it is pretty hard to block for the most part. So it's going to get through mostly. But it is an attacks trigger, I know that. But again, at least it's not going to just get chumped a lot of the time. Do some actual damage. Zealous Conscripts, again, enters an Axe of Treason something. Again, we want to flicker that to get the most value out of it. And that is the list there for this one. So you guys can always let me know what you guys think. Write your thoughts down there in the comments below. Hope you've enjoyed this one, and hope you will join me again in another one.